How's it going, everyone? I'm Dylan, this is All You Can Board, and we have another Marvel Champions preview, and that's because we are getting 2 hero packs released on the exact same day as the Mutant Genesis expansion box. So we knew there was going to be some, scattered previews that they'd have to fit in before we get this expansion box, so we know exactly what to expect. We got Cyclops, and now we've got Phoenix, Jean Grey, which is the Justice hero that has been unveiled, the second standalone X-Men pack. And honestly, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on in this one. On first glance, and after having looked through all the cards, I think I'm still more excited for Cyclops specifically, even though leadership usually isn't the one that excites me as an aspect. I think that hero pack has a lot of exciting stuff going on. But that being said, there is tons of potential in this pack and some really cool mechanics at play. Nothing that is, we've seen a couple other packs take something that already exists in the game, like a mechanic or a keyword or something, and sort of build an entire pack around that and really finding a way to reinvent it. That's not what's happening in this pack specifically. There's just a lot of exciting, neat stuff happening, and the most exciting thing, which we'll get to later on in the video, is what they've done with the Obligation and the Nemesis. I am so pumped about that. I can say right now, this is my favorite Obligation and Nemesis pack in the entire game. So if you're looking to get hyped, there's your hype machine right there. So let's just jump right into this. So we're going to start with Jean Grey, the alter ego, go through all the cards, and we'll talk about what you can come to expect in this pack when it releases, I guess, this fall. So the first one we're looking at is Jean Grey. This is the alter ego. The keyword here, or the text box, says setup. Put your Phoenix Force upgrade into play, restrained side face up, place 4 power counters on it. So this is another hero that comes with sort of a card that's off to the side during setup that has 2 sides and you're flipping between them. A little bit different here, what's happening between them. We'll get to Phoenix Force really soon, and you'll kind of get an idea of what's happening. All you need to know is that what side it's on is based on whether there are power counters on it or there are not. You're basically adding, removing to be able to flip sides. The response here is after you make a basic recovery, place 1 power counter on Phoenix Force. So you're going to add a counter onto that card that's off to the side every single time you use your recovery. Your recovery is 3. Her hit points are 9, lower on the hit point side, and then hand size of 6. So pretty standard all around there. Jumping over to the hero side, which is Phoenix. Interesting stat line where you have 3 thwart, which is great for a starting stat line. Only 1 attack, 2 defense, but we'll get back to the basic stats because they are influenced by Phoenix Force, which is kind of what makes this hero so interesting. The psionic bond ability here is hero resource. Remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force to generate a wild resource. You can do this once per phase. So this is one of your go-to ways to remove counters from that Phoenix Force card, but you're not just removing them with no benefit. You're going to get a wild resource every single time you do. So there is a really good reason to remove these counters aside from potentially wanting to flip over to the other side of it. There are instances where you may not want to flip over to the other side. In that case, you may have to weigh, am I going to generate this wild resource and, expedite me flipping over the Phoenix Force card, or do I want to keep extra power counters on? There is only 1 power counter left. Something you're going to be balancing with this hero. Overall, I think it's not just sort of like, oh, I want to flip the Phoenix Force card. You're going to want it to be on different sides depending on the situation and what the game state is. So let's jump right into Phoenix Force. I feel like that sort of puts a bow on all of this and kind of gets you to better understand what's going on with this hero pack. So Phoenix Force, like I said, has 2 sides. The first one is the Restrained side. The Restrained side is pretty simple. It's just a permanent card. It says you gain the Restrained trait, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't do anything else. The only other text on this card is letting you know how to flip it, which is after the last power counter is removed from here, flip this card. You'll remember there are 4 power counters that are going to start here. Every single time you remove one, after you've removed all 4, this card's going to flip over to the Unleashed side. So that's where there's actually something going on. You'll notice on this side, there's really nothing going on. When this is in play, aside from the fact that you're interacting with it for counters, it's not giving you any benefit or anything like that. It's going to come into play with other cards, what they might say if you're in Restrained form or if you're in Unleashed form. But this card by itself won't do anything for you on the Restrained side. However, when you get over to the Unleashed side, here's where things start to get a little out of control. So you gain the Unleashed trait, you get -2 thwarts. Your base 3 thwart goes down to 1, but you get +2 attacks. You essentially switch your thwart and your attack. So it was 3 thwart, 1 attack, now it's 3 attack, 1 thwart. So this is where this hero is really interesting because you're basically using her Phoenix Force ability and everything to switch whether you're on the offensive or whether you're acting as a regular Justice hero and removing threat. And what is really interesting about that to me is the ramifications of what that means for solo play, how Phoenix will function as a solo hero that has that flexibility to sort of be a really good threat remover, even just for their base stats. and then sort of flip and change gears and go into being an offensive hero and be able to deal damage that you have to do to be able to win the game. The versatility of that is going to be really interesting to see play out as a solo hero, but also just in multiplayer to have that flexibility to kind of fill two roles. There are downsides that come with being unleashed that we'll get to, that it's not just a straight cookie cutter. Oh, you're either in attack mode or you're in, threat removal mode. It's not quite that simple, but needless to say, you'll start to see that as we get to the other cards. But I do like what's happening here. I will say the restrained side is a little bit dull in the sense that it's not really doing anything for you. Putting this card into play during setup, you might be excited saying, oh, this hero has this permanent card that stays here, and it doesn't really do anything until you've activated it, and even then you may not always want to flip it and activate the other side depending on the situation. So it could lead to some moments where it just feels a little underwhelming, but as we'll get into some of these other cards, you'll realize just how powerful the Unleashed side can be. So let's get into some other cards. The first one we're going to look at is a White Hot Room. This is a 2-cost support, alter ego action, exhaust White Hot Room, choose to either place 1 power counter on Phoenix Force or heal 2 damage from Jean Grey. So this is a support card that you can obviously use as much as you want. It doesn't get discarded when you use it. So every time you're in alter ego form, you can heal an extra 2, which is obviously really good. I mean, getting to be able to use your base recovery and this to, if you get this into play early, to know that every time you flip to alter ego, you can heal for 5. That's really useful for a hero that starts with 9 hit points. Something you're probably going to be love having as sort of this fallback to rely on going, oh, I'm low in health, but I know I can recover essentially more than half my health just by going to alter ego. Having the flexibility to also place a power counter on Phoenix Force lets you control where that card is, what side it's on, and what the state of that card is, which is, we'll see in a couple other cards as well. That flexibility, that ability to control that is going to be really important as well. Next, we've got Phoenix Suit. This is a 2-cost upgrade. Phoenix gains the aerial trait, and then we have 2 abilities that come into play depending what side Phoenix Force is on. So when you have the Restrained trait, you now gain Steady. And when you have the Unleashed trait, you gain Retaliate 1. So both are great. They're obviously both beneficial. I would say that for me, I'm more excited about having Steady, not only because I think it's just a more interesting boon than Retaliate is in most situations, not every situation, but also because it sort of adds this extra benefit to the Restrained side that normally doesn't have any. Now all of a sudden you have this extra incentive saying, oh, but now when I'm in Restrained side, I also have Steady, where normally I didn't have anything because of it. So I do like that, and gaining the aerial trait is interesting, even though I don't think we've seen any aerial cards here. We have a bunch of aerial cards in the game that it just makes it for more interesting deck building things, potentially, to be able to say I can include some aerial cards. But again, if you put too many in and everything's relying on you having this one card in play that gives you aerial, if you don't draw that card, suddenly all these other cards could be useless. So that's still the battle you're facing when it comes to aerial, but thematically it makes sense, and it's cool just to have the flexibility and the option. Next, we've got a Psychic Blast. This might be my favorite hero-specific card that was revealed. 2-cost event hero action, deal 4 damage to the villain. So it's straight 2 costs to deal 4 damage, which isn't, we've seen way better than that in the hero specific cards, but even just as a base level of the card, it's not bad. But then on top of that, if you have the Unleashed trait, deal 4 damage to each minion engaged with you. So not only are you dealing 4 damage to the villain, you're essentially, it's not, I don't want to call it a board wipe because you could have minions that aren't going to get killed by this, but for a lot of minions, you're going to basically clear the board. And yes, that may only be targeting 1 minion or 2 minion, but there may be that situation where you're facing Ultron, or you're playing the Goblin scenario and a bunch have come out, where all of a sudden you have this ability to just completely wipe the board or completely get it under control at the very least for 2 costs, which is ridiculous. So the power potential in this card is so high that it's immediately perked my eyebrows, and I'm thinking of all the potential that this card can possibly have. Then we've got Telepathic Trickery. 2-cost event, remove 4 threat from a scheme. If you have the Unleashed trait, stun and confuse an enemy. This card seems bonkers good. Removing 4 threat for 2 is pretty decent as it stands right now, especially because you think when she's also in her Restrained side, even though the other part of this card wouldn't come into play, you can do base 3 threat removal. With this card, you're essentially guaranteed removing 7 threat in a turn, which is enough that you're going to get any scheme under control from whatever state it was in, or clear a scheme completely. So, or target 2 schemes, whatever. So it just aids in that so much and helps you be such a good threat removing hero. But if you have the Unleashed trait, the fact that you get to stun and confuse an enemy as well, the one thing to keep in mind is Well, no, I was going to say the one thing to keep in mind is that you're in the Unleashed trait, your threat is now lower, but that's what makes this card even better, is that you flipped your attack and your threat removal, that so you're only removing one threat when you do your basic threat or basic thwart. But now you have this way to remove threat and stun and confuse an enemy, which is going to be really valuable when you're on the offensive to get the villain or other minions that are, getting your way under control while you want to do all this extra damage. So Telepathic Trickery honestly seems really, really good, and one of those other cards that's going to just really add so much value to the Unleashed form because there's this detriment that we'll get to in a little bit. Then we've got Phoenix Firebird. This is a 1-cost event. Hero action, choose. Remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force, ready Phoenix, or place 2 power counters on Phoenix Force. So again, a card that is all about flexibility on what you want Phoenix Force to be on, which side you want it to be on, and expediting one or the other. But also the fact that just removing 1 power counter is also allowing you to ready Phoenix, which because she has this really strong base 3 threat or base 3 attack, readying her is basically doubling that. So you can look at this in many ways as giving you, for 1 cost, giving you an additional 3 threat removal or 3 damage on top of removing that 1 power counter. So I feel like the flexibility is really good. And for Phoenix specifically, obviously, being able to choose what you want to do with the power counters is just such a valuable thing to make sure you're in the form that best facilitates what's going on the board. Then we've got one of the most interesting cards for sure in this entire pack. It may end up being the most powerful card in the deck. It's just one of those things that I don't have enough to compare to be able to know. But this is a 4-cost upgrade, which I can't remember the last time. We definitely have, I'm sure, but I can't remember the last time I've seen a 4-cost hero-specific card. Normally they always cap off at 3, but I can't remember the last time I saw one that was 4 in the hero-specific cards. So that caught my eye right off the bat. But the ability here is you can attach this to a non-elite minion, take control of the attached minion. It basically becomes an ally. It says it becomes to treat it as a controlled ally. So you now have an ally that will used to be a minion. It has a blank text box, so you don't get whatever the minion's abilities are. But its thwart becomes its printed scheme, and it takes 1 consequential damage after it thwarts or attacks. I'd have to go back and look at all the non-elite minions to see what the most optimal targets here are. But I know there's non-elite minions that have pretty high health compared to what you'd normally maybe come to expect from allies that you're putting into play. So the fact that for 4, you're not only, you can look at this and say, oh, I'm playing a 4-cost ally that's already on the board, but it's not just that, because you're also taking a minion that was on the board and essentially killing it because it's no longer something you have to deal with, and also gaining an ally that if you haven't touched that minion, say it has 4 health, 5 health, and it has a decent stat line, suddenly you are only taking 1 consequential damage on each one. You have this blocker, you're dealing a bunch of damage, you're dealing a bunch of threat removal, you've eliminated a minion, and it only cost you 4 to do all that. I think that this has the potential to be a ridiculous card as long as you have the target for it. I think that's going to be key, because if you don't have the target for it, this is going to be a card that you're just constantly using for the mind resource and not really getting its full value out of. But if you have one of those non-elite, really pesky, really annoying strong minions hit the field, and you haven't touched it yet, and you have this card in your hand, and you're able to take control of this thing and essentially kill that minion for 4 and get yourself an ally that is really strong for that same cost, I think there's just so much power potential here. I can't wait to try this card out. One of the most exciting, if not the most exciting card in this pack for sure. Then we've got Telekinetic Shield, a 2-cost upgrade attached to a friendly character. When attached character would take any damage from an enemy attack, place that damage here instead. Then if there's at least 5 damage here, discard it. So essentially you're going to soak up 5 damage with this card. That's a lot of text just to say you're soaking up 5 damage. Once it hits 5, you're discarding it. That is still really good. The fact that you could have, allies that you want to protect that you can now put this onto to make sure they have extra longevity, or yourself or another hero that is low on health or has a low, max health that you want to protect and be able to soak up some hits. If you're in Unleashed form and you're now on the offensive and you're going to be taking extra damage and not wanting to flip to alter ego, throwing this on yourself to be able to soak up 2 turns of villain hits or whatever the case may be. Lots of potential here to basically just assist in defending while you're doing a bunch of offensive maneuvers. So then we've got Rise from the Ashes, another really pretty wild card here. So this is a 3-cost upgrade. When you would be defeated, so essentially when you would normally die, your hero, remove this card from the game because this is in play as an upgrade. Ready your identity and restore it to its printed hit point value instead, and then remove each power counter from Phoenix Force. So you're essentially resetting your character. You get this one freebie where when you would die, you go back to full health instead and remove this from the game. You can only do it once. That seems really good. Again, because this hero seems to have this mechanic where you are, in one form that is, removing a lot of threat and maybe, going at things at a slower pace. When you flip to Unleashed, all that's going to flip, and you're not on the offensive, and you want to get as much out of that as you can before you flip back, or before we get to some of the other bad stuff that can happen. Rise from the Ashes is going to be that fail-safe that's like, okay, if I have Rise from the Ashes in play, and maybe I have that shield in play or something, now I feel safe that I can go to Unleash and I can just do everything I possibly can to the villain without even really worrying about my own hit points or, if I die, because I can just Rise from the Ashes and just go at it again with a little bit more certainty and playing it a little bit safer. So really cool set of cards in these hero cards that I'm seeing so far. I'm just really excited to try them out and see how they work in unison and just how the hero plays overall. But yeah, cards like this have me really pumped for this pack. Getting into some of the Justice cards, we have a new ally called Banshee, 4-cost ally, 3 health, 2 thwart, 2 attack, 1 consequential damage on both. Ability is pretty simple. The response is after Banshee thwarts, confuse a minion. So that's basically it. Hard to say how reliable or how often you're going to be playing this card. I think that it has, the stat line and the ability and the hit points all really good. I just always wonder with higher cost allies, specifically when they hit 4 and above, how often they're going to make it into decks, depending on, how often you can reliably get them out, or are going to look at something like Banshee in your hand and other options, say, do I want Banshee or do I want any of these other options? I think that's something you're always going to be weighing. That being said, when this is in play, I can't ever see a situation where I'm not pumped about it, because you're going to be thwarting for 6 total. Let's say you don't block with Banshee, you just do 6 thwart removal over 3 turns, and you're confusing 3 minions on top of that. So confuse 3 minions, doing 6 thwart for 4. That seems like a pretty decent value, on top of having the option to reduce one of those and get a block in or an attack, whatever the case may be. So yeah, lots of potential. I just don't know whether or not this is going to become like a staple ally or anything like that. I think it might be a little too expensive for that, and the ability not quite as powerful as it would need to be to sort of offset that cost. Then we've got Marvel Girl. This is a 3-cost ally, 3 health, 2 thwart, 1 attack, 1 consequential damage. Interrupt: when Marvel Girl attacks a minion, remove X threat from the main scheme, where X is that minion's printed scheme. So you're basically turning that minion against itself, and it's scheming for you against the main scheme of the villain. I think that's really good, depending on what the board state is. I think that overall you're going to want to be playing against a villain that has minions that are really scheming for a lot, or that seems to be the hiccup where you're getting lost with, like, oh, I can manage this minion, but whenever I'm an alter ego or whenever I'm dealing with them in this way, I'm losing so much, or I'm getting it so close to being defeated because of what they're doing to the main scheme and stuff like that, or because of what they're doing with their scheme value. Being able to turn that around, have it be a benefit before you kill off that minion is really interesting, and just also at the same time having a blocker. And at 3 costs, I could see this being used a little bit more reliably than Banshee, for instance. But yeah, it's not like earth shattering. I think it's still a little bit situational, where you're gonna have to have the right cards in play. Obviously, with no minions in play, this is just a completely dead card. Not dead card. It's just it has no text box essentially. At that point, you're probably not playing it unless you're in a real pinch. So lots of potential there. Interested to try it out for sure. Then we've got Mission Training, 1-cost upgrade attached to an X-Men ally, max 1 training upgrade per ally. Attached ally gets +1 thwart and 2 hit points. We've seen a lot of these training cards. I think they have a lot of potential. Being able to power up your allies with stats like this for such a cheap cost is really good, especially with some of the allies we've been seeing that have really good abilities and you want to extend their life as much as possible. Getting +1 thwart and +2 hit points, I think, is a pretty big deal, especially when you start factoring in that we haven't even seen all the X-Men allies that in the game yet, but even just the ones we already have, there's so many exciting targets for a card like this that by the time we're finished this entire X-Men cycle, or we've gotten a whole slew of them, cards like this are just going to continually go up in value. So that's one of the reasons I'm always excited about these trading cards. Then we've got Psychic Manipulation. This is a 3-cost event. Play only for identity, has the Psionic trait, which Phoenix does, but I'm sure we're going to see others that do. Interrupt, thwart, when the villain schemes. This activation removes threat instead of placing it. Really cool card. So basically, whatever the villain would normally be scheming for turns into a thwart against its own scheme. rather than adding a threat to it, which is good. Like, especially if you're in a position where, normally if you didn't have a card like this, you'd be like, oh, I could lose next turn depending what they flip, depending what happens. Do I want to risk it? Having a card like this just is a fail safe. It's not cheap by any means, and it has the stipulation of needing the psionic trait, so maybe you're only using it in very specific situations where it's a large amount coming out that you want to flip. But regardless, it's a cool card to have in the game, and it's something I think we'll definitely see some use, especially against specific villains where the scheme is pretty high. Then we've got Mutant Peacekeepers. This is a 1-cost event. Play only if your identity has the X-Men trait. Hero action, exhaust your hero and any number of X-Men allies. Remove X threat from among schemes in play, where X is the total thwart of all those characters. So again, we've seen cards like this. This is essentially taking all your thwart values that are in play and using them for just like the same way you would if you actually exhausted all those characters. The difference here being that all your allies are not going to get consequential damage. So that's the benefit here, is for 1 cost, you're foregoing all the consequential damage that turn, and you're doing threat removal with every single character, and you're able to split that up still amongst the schemes in play, which is really good. I think it's a great card, but again, it's going to be dependent on, in the Justice build you have, how many X-Men allies you're getting to play at once, and whether it's going to make sense for you to save that consequential damage, or whether you want to use this card as a resource to fund something else in your hand. Last one we're going to look at before we get some really exciting obligation and Nemesis talk. We have Cerebro. This is a 1-cost basic support. Play only if your identity has the mutant trait. A lot of trait requirements here. Alter ego action, exhaust Cerebro. Search the top 5 cards of your deck for an X-Men ally, and search your whole deck instead if you control a psionic character, and then add that ally to your hand. Really, really powerful card. Obviously, if you have the psionic trait, especially, being able to just search your entire deck for an X-Men ally is ridiculous for 1 cost. If you've built your deck in a very specific way where you have these really strong X-Men allies, and your only potential thing that can go wrong is you don't draw them, or you draw them at inopportune times, being able to, for 1 cost, this 1-cost support, have it in play and exhaust it whenever you want to just say, I'm going to go grab this exact ally I want, and be able to use that as many times as you want. Like, you're not discarding this card from play. You can, every time you're in alter ego form, you can just go grab any ally, any X-Men ally from your deck, or the top 5 cards, which is still good if there's an ally there. But I think it's the entire deck situation where having this psionic character is going to make Cerebro a pretty, hard card not to include if you have enough allies to benefit from it, because just being able to constantly grab allies from your deck into your hand is just such a great benefit. So I'm excited about this card, especially because we're so fresh in the X-Men cycle. I think it's only going to get better as we have more cards introduced, but even now the psionic ability specifically on this card is really good. Okay, let's get situated here and talk about what is, I think, the coolest part of this deck, and that is the obligation. Now it ties into the Nemesis. I've said it before, I like when they find new and interesting ways to shake up the obligations. Normally there's a lot of obligations that are just like, you can draw them and you know exactly what you have to do. It's like, okay, am I going to exhaust or not? And that's basically all that happens. We've been getting some more interesting ones. This one takes the cake though. So this says, give to the Jean Grey player, when revealed, if you have the Unleash trait, and that's the key here, is this is a really, really big bad thing to have happen if you're in Unleashed form. If you're in the Restrained form, it's sort of a normal obligation. If you have the Unleashed trait, search the encounter deck, discard pile, and set aside area for Dark Phoenix and reveal her. Dark Phoenix is your Nemesis. So one way or another, no matter where Dark Phoenix is, she is coming into play if you draw this obligation when you're in Unleashed form. And we'll get to right away why that is so bad. It's not just a regular Nemesis. Then remove Burning Hunger from the game, so you only have to have this happen once. If you have the Restrained trait, all you do is remove 1 power counter from Phoenix Force, and then this card gains Surge, but you only discard it, which means it can come back. So why is this so interesting? It's because Dark Phoenix is not a regular Nemesis. Dark Phoenix is a nasty, nasty Nemesis that can lead to you just losing the game completely. So there's a 2-scheme, 2-attack minion that has 12 health and has steady, toughness, and villainous. When Dark Phoenix schemes, you place that threat on Consume the World if able, which we'll get to as sort of the last piece of this puzzle. And then when revealed, search the encounter deck, discard a pile, and set aside area for Consume the World and reveal it. So essentially, normally you'd only see the side scheme and the Nemesis coming into play together when you draw. Oh my God, why am I blanking on. Oh, I'm having one of those days all around where it's been so go that I'm just like blanking on things that I should know the name of, and I can't remember the name of the card that brings your Nemesis and everything into play, and it's gonna kill me. Someone in the comments is gonna be, how did you possibly forget the name of this? It's just one of those days, and I'm having the brain fog. Anyways, normally that's the only way that you would get these cards into play, or specifically like your side scheme, because there's been other cards that bring just the Nemesis into play, but it doesn't trigger other stuff. This is now saying when revealed, you're bringing in Consume the World, because they're sort of a tandem deal. Every time she schemes, you're going to be adding threat on to Consume the World, and if you look at Consume the World, it starts with 6 threat on it, and it says while there is no threat here, this scheme loses the icon that's on it. However, forced response after threat is placed here, if there is at least 12, you lose the game. So it's just another way to lose the game. And on top of the main scheme that you're dealing with, you now have a side scheme that also leads to you losing the game if you don't deal with it. That to me is just so much more interesting. Yes, it's way more difficult, but to have this obligation that says if you stay in unleashed form too long, or if it hasn't been drawn yet, your obligation, and you don't have the you can't be assured that it's in the discard pile and will come up for a while. There's this chance that you draw it, and your Nemesis and the side scheme come into play. The Nemesis is ridiculously hard to deal with. And you can't just focus on the Nemesis, because if Consume the World gets 6 more threat on it, you lose the game. So you're managing the threat there, having to make sure that stays under control, while also needing to get rid of Dark Phoenix as soon as possible. It changes the entire state of the game to the point where you're on the defense in a big way, which I just absolutely love. I think it's going to be so cool to see what this swing is going to be like, where you're in unleashed form and you're just on the offensive and you're doing super well, and you've kind of turned the tides, and you happen to draw your obligation, and suddenly the entire game changes. Now you're completely trying to deal with all this stuff going on. It reminds me of a moment Braden and I had when we played Marvel Champions on the 24-hour live stream, where the state of the game just kind of flip-flopped. We thought we were under control, then we weren't. Those are the most interesting moments and the swings in Marvel Champions. I think this just creates that opportunity in every game you play. Sometimes it's going to cost you the game, but I think there's just so much more interesting stuff going on here with the obligation, Nemesis, and everything all around than we've seen in other heroes, that I'm totally fine losing games this way if it means having this really interesting way to play with Phoenix specifically. Those are all the cards. Phoenix, like I said, overall seems like a really interesting hero. There's some points I'm wondering if while playing her it's going to seem like a little anticlimactic, where maybe that's the wrong word to use, but essentially when you're in restrained form, you could have a bunch of turns where you just feel like, oh, I'm playing this hero and there's nothing really that unique about her. I can manage these power counters, but I either don't want to go to unleashed form right away, or I can't right now. So all I'm really doing is just using these basic cards, and sometimes you're drawing cards that add power counters. Maybe you don't quite know if you want to flip forms. It's hard to know a lot of this without having played Phoenix yet, but just having the potential there, and having things like Consume the World and Dark Phoenix and everything as things that could be coming up in the game is so much more interesting, that I think I'm going to enjoy this hero pack a lot. And the fact that it's a Justice hero, or in the sense that it comes with Justice cards, that has all this aggression potential as well, that I think that you could build some really, really solid aggression builds where the entire point is to just get to unleash as fast as you can and stay there, and then just burn the villain down as fast as you possibly can. And perhaps you've built in tools that if your obligation comes out, if things get out of control, you can try to rebound from that and have these defensive cards sort of save you there. Regardless, lots of cool stuff going on here. I still, like I said, think I'm a little bit more excited for Cyclops, but I can't know until I play them. But it is really neat, the difference between these heroes that we're getting. And I think they're going to be really fun to take through on the Mutant Genesis box, if you don't want to go with the ones that come in the box specifically. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you are excited for Phoenix like I am. Let me know in the comments which parts of this hero pack are specifically, getting you most excited, or maybe that are not getting you excited. What is it that you're, is keeping it from being an exciting pack for you? Just let me know in the comments what you think about the pack. I'd love to discuss it with you. Otherwise, I think the next time I'll be talking with you, it'll be a hero review. I think we're going to be getting some hero packs coming out soon. I think it's Spider-Ham and Spider, if I'm not mistaken, are coming out sometime this month, I believe. So you'll be seeing that content from me, and otherwise after that it'll be a Mutant Genesis or other preview articles. So thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.